She was my wife, my best friend, the woman carrying our child. For 5 years, I thought we had it all: love, trust, a future. But it all unraveled the day I noticed her phone was never out of her hand, and her smile wasn't mine anymore. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the pregnancy, or maybe work stress. But then I saw the message, and that's when my world split in two. It wasn't just the betrayal that broke me. It was the fact that she let him back in. What would you do if the person you loved most betrayed you in the worst way possible? If you knew another man had taken a place in her heart? This is my story. The story of how I discovered the truth, and how I chose to walk away from the life I thought was mine. It started with the smallest changes, little things I might not have noticed if I weren't paying attention. Sophie, my wife of 5 years, had been distant lately, but I told myself it was the pregnancy hormones. Our first child was due in a few months, and I figured the stress was getting to her. But there were other signs I couldn't brush off. The first was the phone. She'd been glued to it more than usual, her fingers dancing over the screen with a focus that shut out the world around her. Whenever I walked into the room, she'd casually flip it over or press it to her chest, like a teenager hiding a secret. I didn't think much of it at first. Work calls, maybe? Sophie managed a high-profile client list and had always been dedicated to her job. Still, something felt off. Then there was the irritability. Small things set her off. A misplaced coffee cup, a question about baby names, even my jokes, things she used to love. Her mood swings were fierce and unpredictable, like summer storms rolling in from nowhere. But whenever I asked her what was wrong, she'd sigh, kiss my cheek, and say, "I'm just tired, Archie." That night, I sat in the living room, the soft glow of the TV casting shadows on the walls. Sophie was upstairs, having taken her phone with her to the bathroom. My mind wandered to that phone again. I hated feeling suspicious. I loved Sophie. We'd built a life together. A cozy home, laughter-filled weekends, and now a baby on the way. I couldn't let my doubts ruin that. But then it happened. A text message pinged from her phone, left momentarily unattended on the kitchen counter while she grabbed a glass of water. The name on the screen wasn't familiar. Martin? I glanced toward the stairs. She was still in the bathroom. The temptation gnawed at me. Don't do it, I told myself. Trust her. But my heart pounded, drowning out reason. I tapped the screen to see the preview. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'll make sure we're not disturbed. You need to relax. Every word hit like a punch to the gut. Tomorrow? Not disturbed? Relax? Sophie had mentioned she was visiting a friend that day. She'd even packed an overnight bag, saying she wanted a break before the baby arrived. Was this what she meant? Footsteps on the stairs. My heart raced. "Archie?" Sophie called out. Her voice was calm, as if nothing was wrong. I stepped away from the phone, struggling to compose myself. The room felt smaller, suffocating. But I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just pregnancy hormones. This was something else. I tried to sleep that night, but the words on Sophie's phone replayed over and over in my head. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'll make sure we're not disturbed. You need to relax. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Sophie lay beside me, her breathing steady and soft. I turned my head to look at her. The dim light from the street lamp outside cast faint lines across her face, illuminating her in a way that made her look peaceful, almost angelic. How could someone I loved so deeply be capable of hiding something from me? Morning came too quickly. Sophie woke up before me, slipping out of bed quietly. I listened to her footsteps as she moved around the house, the sounds of drawers opening and the tap running. My mind was racing. Was she packing for him? Was she making plans to meet him, right under my nose? I decided to wait. "Archie," she called from the doorway, her tone light and casual. "I'm heading out now. Are you sure you'll be okay? Don't forget your appointment with Dr. Whitaker later." I forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing inside me. "Of course. I'll be fine." She walked over and kissed my forehead, her lips lingering just a little longer than usual. I wanted to believe in that kiss, that it meant something. But the text from Martin wouldn't leave my mind. "Love you," she whispered. "Love you too," I murmured, my words hollow. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, I sat up. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't sit here, waiting. I had to know where she was going. Grabbing my coat, I left the house and got into my car. I parked a few houses down, waiting for Sophie to pull out of the driveway. She did, right on schedule. I followed at a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe she really was going to see her friend. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But then she turned onto a quiet road on the outskirts of town. A road I knew well. There was no friend's house here. Only a small hotel tucked behind a row of trees. My stomach twisted. I watched from a distance as she pulled into the hotel's parking lot. She parked, grabbed her overnight bag, and walked inside without a second glance. I stayed in my car, frozen. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, another car pulled in. A sleek, black sedan. The driver got out. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an air of confidence that made my skin crawl. He was dressed sharply, like he'd just come from a meeting. He checked his reflection in the car window before heading inside. Martin. It had to be him. The confirmation hit me like a freight train. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart thudding in my chest. For a moment, I thought about confronting them right then and there, storming into that hotel and demanding answers. But I stopped myself. No, I needed more than an angry confrontation. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth. As I sat there, watching the hotel like a detective on a stakeout, I realized I was no longer the same man I'd been just 24 hours ago. Something inside me had shifted, and I wasn't leaving until I got answers. I stayed in that parking lot for what felt like hours, staring at the hotel entrance. My mind ran wild with every possibility. Were they laughing inside? Kissing? Had they planned this all along? Right under my nose? I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles aching. Finally, the door swung open, and there he was, Martin. He walked out casually, as if he hadn't just shattered my world. He didn't seem rushed or guilty. He even pulled out his phone and checked something before heading back to his car. I watched him drive off, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't leave it at that. I had to know what Sophie was doing inside. I parked my car across the street and approached the hotel on foot, trying to look like just another guest. The lobby was quiet, the receptionist barely glancing up as I entered. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm looking for my wife. She left her phone at home, and I couldn't reach her. Her name's Sophie Lawton." The receptionist tilted her head, her eyes scanning the computer screen. "She checked in earlier," she said. "Room 204. Room 204. I thanked her and walked toward the elevator, every step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. When I reached the second floor, I hesitated outside the door to room 204. My hand hovered over the door handle. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but my heart pushed me forward. I knocked. There was a pause. Then footsteps. The door cracked open, and Sophie's face appeared. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of our unspoken words hanging in the air. "Archie?" Her voice was shaky, a mixture of surprise and panic. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing." She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "That's funny because I don't even know what to think anymore." She glanced around nervously. "We can't talk here." "Oh, why not?" "Because Martin might walk by?" I snapped, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. Her face paled. "You've been following me?" "What was I supposed to do, Sophie? You've been acting strange for weeks. Then I see a message from some guy named Martin saying he can't wait to see you." I gestured toward the door. "And here you are, in a hotel?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I swear, it's not what it looks like." "Then tell me," I said, my voice breaking. "Tell me what it is." She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated. The silence stretched between us, unbearable. "Forget it," I said, turning to leave. "I've heard enough." "Wait." She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Archie, please. It's complicated." I pulled my arm away. Complicated? You're pregnant, Sophie. We're supposed to be starting a family. How could you do this? Her lip trembled. It's not that simple. I shook my head, stepping back. I gave you everything. I trusted you. And this is what I get. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked away, each step feeling like I was leaving pieces of myself behind. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was angry, and I was determined to find out the truth, even if it destroyed me. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, wandering through the house like a ghost. My mind was on autopilot, moving from room to room without any real purpose. Every photo on the wall mocked me. Pictures of Sophie and me, smiling like the perfect couple. There was one of us at the beach, her hand resting on her barely there baby bump. I couldn't look at it. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, until my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up. Sophie. I let it ring, but it buzzed again and again. Finally, I picked it up, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. Archie? Her voice was trembling. Silence stretched between us. Archie, please talk to me. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. What do you want? There was a long pause before she answered. I'm in the hospital. That got my attention. I sat up straight. What? The stress. It was too much, she said softly. The baby. They're keeping me here for observation. Her voice cracked. I need you. My heart clenched despite everything. The thought of something happening to our baby filled me with dread. What happened? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. I started having pains after you left, she said. I tried to calm down, but I couldn't. I was so scared, Archie. I thought, she choked back a sob. I thought I was going to lose the baby. The weight of her words pressed down on me. Are you okay now? They said the baby's heartbeat is strong, but I need to rest. They're keeping me overnight. She paused, then whispered, I've never been so scared in my life. Please, Archie, can you come? I ran a hand over my face, torn between anger and concern. I don't know if I can, I said honestly. Her voice grew desperate. Please, just come and talk to me. We can't leave things like this. You need to understand what's really going on. I almost laughed at that. Understand? Sophie, I saw you at that hotel. What exactly am I supposed to understand? It's not what you think, she said quickly. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I clenched my jaw, memories of Martin flashing in my mind. I'm not doing this over the phone, I said. If you want to talk, I'll come to the hospital, but you better be ready to tell me the truth. She let out a shaky breath of relief. Thank you. That's all I'm asking. I hung up without another word, staring at the phone in my hand. The woman I'd built a life with, the woman carrying my child, was lying in a hospital bed, and I was about to find out if everything I knew about her was a lie. I drove to the hospital with a heavy weight in my chest. The city lights blurred past me, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped in the swirl of emotions I couldn't shake. Anger, confusion, fear. Was I walking into the truth? Or was Sophie about to spin more lies to cover her tracks? When I reached the hospital, I parked in a daze, barely remembering how I got there. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit me as I walked through the doors, past nurses and patients, the hum of hospital life blending into a distant background noise. At the front desk, I asked for Sophie. The nurse directed me to the maternity wing on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator, the ride feeling like an eternity. When I finally reached her room, I stopped outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and leaving. Maybe it was better not to know, but I couldn't walk away. I pushed the door open quietly. Sophie lay in the hospital bed, pale and tired, but still beautiful. Her hair was pulled back, and her hands rested protectively over her baby bump. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Archie, her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. I'm here. She wiped her eyes and tried to sit up straighter. Thank you for coming. I didn't know if you would. I wasn't sure myself, I admitted. We stared at each other in silence for a moment. The tension was thick, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. You said you wanted to explain. So explain. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly as they clutched the bedsheet. It's complicated. I clenched my jaw. Stop saying that. She flinched but nodded. Okay, you're right. You deserve the truth. I folded my arms, waiting. She looked away, her eyes focusing on the window. I met Martin a long time ago. Before you, and I even got serious. We had a thing. But it ended. Or at least, I thought it did. My chest tightened. And now? Her eyes flicked back to mine, filled with guilt. He showed up again a few months ago. At first, it was innocent. He reached out to catch up, and I thought, what's the harm? I scoffed. The harm is pretty obvious now, isn't it? Her lip trembled. I didn't plan for it to go this far. I swear. I never wanted to hurt you. I shook my head. Sophie, you didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me. You're carrying our child, and you've been sneaking around with him. At that, her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was confused. I've been feeling so alone lately, and Martin, he made me feel seen again. Alone? I repeated, anger rising in my chest. You're pregnant with our baby, Sophie. We were supposed to be in this together. How could you say you felt alone? She covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. I know I've messed up. I know I've broken your trust. But please, Archie, don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. I stood there, watching her fall apart, my emotions a tangled mess. Then a chilling thought crossed my mind, one I hadn't dared entertain until that moment. The baby, I said slowly, my voice trembling. Is it mine? Her head shot up, her eyes wide with horror. Of course. How could you even ask that? Because I've had nothing but lies from you for weeks. You expect me to believe you now? She shook her head furiously. It's yours, Archie. I swear it. I've never been with Martin like that since we've been together. I searched her face for any hint of deceit. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another lie to keep me from walking away? I want a paternity test, I said coldly. Her mouth fell open, shock and pain flashing across her face. You don't trust me at all? I met her gaze, my voice steady. Why should I? The silence that followed was deafening. I'll do it, she whispered, defeated. If that's what it takes to make you stay, I'll do it. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I could stay. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The ride home from the hospital felt surreal. Sophie's words echoed in my mind. The baby is yours. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But the damage had been done. Trust doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks, slowly, until it finally collapses under the weight of too many lies. And I wasn't sure ours could be rebuilt. As I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house we'd made a home. Memories came flooding back. Sophie laughing as we painted the nursery, her head resting on my shoulder during lazy Sunday mornings, the way she looked at me on our wedding day. How did we get here? I went inside, the quiet of the house pressing down on me. The nursery door was ajar, and I found myself standing in the doorway, staring at the crib we put together just last week. The mobile above it spun lazily in the draft from the open window. It was supposed to be a symbol of new beginnings. Instead, it felt like a monument to something broken. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Sophie, but it wasn't her. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Archibald? The voice was deep, smooth, and far too familiar. I gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? There was a pause, then a chuckle. I think you know. Martin. My blood ran cold. What the hell do you want? I growled. I think it's time we had a chat man to man. I clenched my jaw. There's nothing to talk about. Oh, I think there is, he said, his tone calm, like he had the upper hand. You see, Sophie told me about your little hospital visit. I imagine things are pretty tense for you right now. I paced the room, my heart pounding. Stay away from my wife. Your wife? He laughed, a low, mocking sound. Is she really yours, Archie? Because from where I'm standing, It seems like she's been looking for something you couldn't give her. My fists clenched. You don't know anything about us? I know more than you think, he said. And I know she's not happy. But I'm not calling to rub it in. I'm calling to help. Help. I spat. You've got to be kidding me. No, I'm serious, Martin said, his tone suddenly grave. You want to know the truth, right? About me, about Sophie, about the baby? The room spun around me. I don't trust you, I said. Good. You shouldn't. There was a pause, then, meet me. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., at the coffee shop on Birch Street. I'll tell you everything. And why the hell would I do that? Because, Martin said quietly, whether you like it or not, I'm part of your life now, and you deserve to know what you're dealing with. The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. Was this a trap? A ploy to twist the knife deeper? Or was it my chance to finally learn the truth? Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't walk away from this. Not yet. I walked into the coffee shop on Birch Street the next morning, my mind cold and calculating. I had spent the night wrestling with my thoughts, but by dawn, I was resolved. I wasn't going to let Martin get inside my head. The place was quiet, the soft clink of coffee cups and murmured conversations filling the air. Martin was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, a smug grin on his face as he stirred his coffee. He looked polished, put together, like a man who believed he was untouchable. Archibald. He gestured to the seat across from him. I'm glad you came. I sat down without a word, my hands folded calmly on the table. Martin leaned in slightly, his voice low. Let's skip the small talk. I'm sure you've got questions, and I've got answers. I didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing any emotion. Go ahead. He studied me for a moment, as if trying to gauge how far he could push. Sophie and I go way back. I was her first. Did she ever tell you that? Probably not. Women don't like to share that kind of thing. He smirked. We were good together. Really good. My jaw clenched, but I kept my face neutral. I've been in her life on and off for years, Martin continued. Even when she was with you, she'd reach out to me. At first, it was just texts, little conversations. But then it became more. He leaned back, crossing his arms. She never stopped wanting me. Still, I said nothing. Now, here's where things get tricky, Martin said, his tone hardening. You're about to have a baby, and I'm sure you're wondering if it's yours. Let me clear that up for you. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's not. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my composure. Martin chuckled. You're taking this well. I expected more fireworks. Anger. Threats. He shrugged. But maybe you're just smarter than I gave you credit for. I met his gaze steadily. Are you done? His smirk faded slightly. I'm just getting started. You're in over your head, Archibald. Sophie is never going to leave me. And if you try to make things difficult, well, he tapped the table lightly. I've got ways to make sure you regret it. For a long moment, I just stared at him. The man across from me believed he was untouchable, that he held all the cards. It was time to change that. I leaned in, my voice calm but cold. I know who you are, Martin. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. I know where you live. I know what you do on the weekends. I know what time you get home every night. I gave him a pointed look. So don't even think about threatening me. Martin's cocky demeanor faltered. I kept going. If anything happens, anything, you better be ready to answer for it. I'll make sure of that. He tried to recover, forcing a smirk. You're bluffing. I tilted my head slightly. Am I? Silence stretched between us. The truth? I was bluffing. But Martin didn't know that. What he didn't realize was that I had someone on my side. An old friend named Daniel. Daniel wasn't just any friend. He ran a private military company that specialized in high-level security and intelligence for the ultra-wealthy. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I reached out to him the night before, he picked up immediately. Archie, Daniel said, his voice warm but curious. It's been a while. I need a favor, I said without preamble, and I'm willing to pay. There was a pause before he responded. Go on. I told him everything, about Sophie, Martin, and my growing suspicion that this man wasn't just a threat to my marriage, but to my life. Daniel listened quietly before answering. Consider it done. I'll have my team look into him. We'll find everything there is to know about Martin. And Archie? Yeah. I'll make sure he knows he's not untouchable. Hanging up that call felt like a lifeline. I didn't care about the cost. I'd pay whatever it took to protect myself and expose Martin for who he really was. Now, sitting across from Martin in that coffee shop, I could see the cracks forming in his facade. He tried to laugh it off. "You're bluffing," he repeated, but there was less certainty in his voice now. I stood up slowly, leaning over the table. "Think what you want, but remember, when you play with fire, you tend to get burned." Without another word, I walked out, leaving him sitting there, his coffee forgotten. The moment I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "We've got a lead. You'll want to see this." Things were about to get very interesting. I sat in my car after leaving the coffee shop, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers hurt. Martin had made himself clear. He wasn't just some blast from Sophie's past. He was a threat. The way he spoke, the smugness, the entitlement, it gnawed at me. I wasn't going to let him take any more from me. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Daniel. "Archie," he said when I picked up. His voice was steady, professional, like we'd just spoken yesterday instead of years ago. "We've got something. You were right to call me." I leaned back in my seat. "Tell me." My team ran a deep dive on Martin Donnelly. He's a textbook manipulator. Women aren't just a hobby for him, they're a lifestyle. He targets them, builds trust, and then exploits it. There's a pattern. That familiar weight settled in my chest. What kind of pattern? Daniel's tone darkened. He latches onto women with access, money, connections, influence. We've traced several relationships like this. In most cases, they ended with him walking away with a hefty payoff. One woman paid him to keep quiet about their affair. Another signed over a property to him. Blackmail? Exactly. He collects compromising information, photos, texts, anything he can use as leverage. He doesn't just leave when he's done with them. He makes sure they pay to keep their lives intact. My stomach turned. And Sophie? We're still piecing together his interactions with her, but there's something you should know. Daniel paused. A few months ago, Sophie wrote a check to a jewelry store in town. We found a matching purchase in Martin's name, a payment made around the same time. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. The jewelry store. The $3,000 withdrawal from Sophie's account. I'd assumed she was replacing something stolen. Now I wasn't so sure. What did he buy? I asked. "A necklace and a ring," Daniel said. "Both expensive. The kind of thing you'd give to someone you're keeping close." The thought of Sophie accepting gifts from Martin made my blood boil. "Is there more?" I asked, my voice tight. "There's always more," Daniel replied. "I've got surveillance on him now. We'll find out where he goes, who he meets, and what he's planning. But Archie, yeah, you need to be prepared for what we find. This guy plays dirty, and if Sophie's been involved with him longer than you think, it's going to get messy." I stared out the windshield, my thoughts a whirlwind. I wasn't just dealing with Sophie's betrayal anymore. Martin was a threat to my life, my family, my future. "I don't care how messy it gets," I said. "I need to know everything." Daniel sighed. "I figured you'd say that. We'll handle it. But remember, Archie, this isn't about revenge. It's about protecting yourself." The call ended, but Daniel's words lingered. Protect myself. That's what it had come down to. I sat there in the quiet for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. How had we ended up here? How had Sophie's betrayal spiraled into something so twisted? But deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't just about Sophie's choices. It was about mine. I'd spent years trusting her, building a life with her, believing in us. And now, that trust had been ripped apart, leaving me with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Stay and fight for the life we built, or walk away from the ruins? I wasn't sure which option hurt more. But one thing was certain. Martin wasn't going to win. Not this time. The following days passed in a blur of exhaustion and dread. I waited for updates from Daniel, piecing together what I could from the fragments of Sophie's betrayal. Each new revelation chipped away at the image I'd held of her, the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared. It all came crashing down one evening when I walked into the house and found Sophie waiting for me in the living room. She looked tired, drawn, and pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped a cup of tea, but her eyes held mine with a desperate kind of resolve. "We need to talk," she said softly. I nodded, my heart heavy. "Yeah, we do." I sat across from her, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, wide and impossible to bridge. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've broken your trust, but I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen." I shook my head slowly. "Don't say that, Sophie. You made choices. You let him back into your life." Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't like that. It started with him reaching out, and I was stupid. I thought I could handle it. But Martin has a way of pulling people in. That doesn't excuse it," I said, my voice cold. "You didn't stop it. You didn't tell me. You lied to me." She wiped her eyes, her shoulders slumping. "I was scared. Scared that if you knew, you'd never forgive me." I leaned forward, my gaze hard. "And what about the baby, Sophie? Is it mine?" She flinched as if I'd struck her. "Yes," she whispered. "The baby is yours. I swear it." I studied her face, looking for any sign of deceit, but I saw only pain and regret. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, but something inside me had already broken. "Do you love him?" I asked quietly. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head fiercely. "No, I never loved him. I was just lost, and he took advantage of that." I let out a bitter laugh. "Lost? You had me, Sophie. You had a family. You had everything we were building." "I know," she whispered, "and I ruined it. I know that." I sat back, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "I talked to Martin." Her face went pale. "What?" "I know about the jewelry. I know how he operates. He uses women, manipulates them, blackmails them." I paused. "But you let him in. You opened the door." Sophie's shoulders shook as she sobbed quietly. "I don't know how to fix this." I stood up, looking down at her, feeling the finality of the moment settle over me. "You can't fix this," I said softly. "Some things can't be undone." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. Not anymore. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be in touch about the baby. But this is over." "Archie, please." I shook my head. I deserve better than this. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door. The night air was cold, biting at my skin, but it felt freeing, like I could finally breathe again. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Martin won't bother you again." He got the message. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Good. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and kept driving, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage, the lies, and the betrayal. I didn't know where I was headed, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally moving forward. Away from her. Away from him. Towards something new. And this time, I'd make sure no one ever betrayed me like that again.